A son? He barked bitterly. Yes, you didn't give me a son. And you think 2 daughters are enough for me? Do you know how it feels to be mocked by people because I have no male child? His voice was loud, and in the small living room of the Ikeja home, it rang with years of pent-up frustration. Mimi stood in shock. Mocked? Who mocks you? In the bustling city of Ikeja, Lagos, life moved at a vibrant pace. The roads were often crowded with yellow buses, and the air filled with the calls of street vendors. Ikeja is a busy commercial hub and the capital of Lagos State, where people from all walks of life chase their dreams each day. Amidst this lively city of commerce and struggle, there lived a man named Kelvin who thought he had everything figured out. Kelvin was well educated and successful in his career, and he carried himself with confidence. Kelvin prided himself on his accomplishments and believed he knew what was best in all things. In his mind, even love and marriage were subjects he could control and perfect. He was married to a woman named Mimi, but their story was not a typical fairy tale. Before they married, Mimi had been a bright and kind-hearted young woman who, due to life's challenges, had dropped out of school. To Kelvin, Mimi was beautiful and loyal, yet he felt she could never truly match his status unless she too was elevated in education and sophistication. He believed that for her to stand by his side, she needed to rise to his level. Kelvin first met Mimi years ago at a family friends gathering in Ikeja. She was warm, humble, and intelligent in her own quiet way. However, Mimi's education had been cut short. She left school early due to financial difficulties in her family. Seeing her potential, Kelvin encouraged her to return to school. He even helped her enroll in a program. Mimi was hesitant at first, but Kelvin's confidence was contagious. With his support and her own determination, she went back to complete her studies. Balancing books with household responsibilities wasn't easy for Mimi, but she persevered. Every evening, after attending classes during the day, she would sit by the dim light, reviewing her notes while Kelvin watched with approval. In time, Mimi not only finished school, but went on to attend a college where she studied business management. It was a challenging journey, but Kelvin was proud of her achievement. He liked to boast to friends that he had shaped Mimi into a smart, educated woman worthy of being his wife. In truth, Mimi's success was due to her own hard work and dedication, but Kelvin's ego made him feel as if he were the architect of her transformation. When Mimi finally graduated with her degree in business management, Kelvin was overjoyed and proud. Shortly after her graduation, he proposed marriage, feeling that she was now at the level he deemed acceptable. Mimi, who had loved Kelvin deeply from the start, was happy to marry him. She believed that their love had grown stronger through the challenges they overcame together. On their wedding day, Kelvin stood tall and satisfied, thinking he had done the right thing by waiting for Mimi to improve herself. He thought he had everything arranged perfectly, a beautiful, educated wife by his side, ready to start a new chapter in life with him in Ikeja. The early days of their marriage were pleasant enough. Mimi was a devoted wife, loyal, gentle, and committed to making their home happy. She took care of their small apartment in Ikeja, cooked Kelvin's favorite meals, and supported him every way she could. Kelvin's friends admired Mimi's kindness and how she respected her husband. On the surface, it seemed Kelvin had everything he wanted. Yet, as months turned into a couple of years, Kelvin felt an unexpected restlessness growing inside him. In the first few years of their marriage, Mimi gave birth to two lovely daughters, Syrian and Praise. Kelvin was overjoyed to be a father, and they both loved their girls dearly. However, deep down, Kelvin also longed for a son to carry on the family name. He never said this openly to Mimi at first, but the thought nagged at him quietly. Something was missing for Kelvin, though he couldn't quite name it. Mimi had proven herself educated and capable, but to Kelvin, it sometimes felt like she wasn't keeping up with his intellectual conversations or the lifestyle he imagined. In truth, this was more about Kelvin's own pride and expectations than anything Mimi did wrong. Mimi tried her best to engage with Kelvin's interests and friends, but he often subtly belittled her suggestions or ignored her opinions. Over time, Mimi grew quieter, sensing that her husband's love was cooling, even though she couldn't understand why. She would ask softly, "Kelvin, is everything okay? You seem distant." But Kelvin would just force a smile and say he was fine. Before long, the cracks began to show more clearly. Kelvin started working later than usual and became more protective of his phone, often stepping outside to take calls in private. At home, he grew impatient and irritable over small things, dinner being a bit late, the house not perfectly quiet when he was reading, or the children making noise. Mimi sensed that the real issue wasn't these little things. Her husband's heart was drifting elsewhere, and it pained her deeply. She remembered how hard she had worked to become the woman he wanted, and she couldn't understand why that didn't seem to be enough to keep him happy. As Kelvin grew more distant at home, there was another presence quietly entering his life, a young woman named Elizabeth. They met through a mutual colleague at work function on the mainland. Elizabeth was charming and quick to smile, with a lively spark that caught Kelvin's attention immediately. She listened eagerly when Kelvin spoke, laughing at his jokes and complimenting him in ways that made him feel admired and important. Compared to Mimi's gentle and steady love, Elizabeth's flattery felt exciting and new. Kelvin started to believe that Elizabeth understood him better, or at least made him feel more special. At first, it was just harmless conversations and lunches. Kelvin told himself there was no harm in talking to a pretty woman who appreciated his intellect and success. But one evening, after a long day, Kelvin found himself confiding in Elizabeth about his personal life. Over drinks at a quiet bar in Ikeja, he complained that he wasn't completely happy at home. "Mimi is a good woman," he admitted, "but sometimes I feel like something is missing." Elizabeth leaned in sympathetically, her eyes shining as she spoke softly. "You deserve to be happy, Kelvin. You work so hard. You should have everything you want." Her words were like honey to his ears. As the weeks went by, Kelvin and Elizabeth's bond grew. What started as friendship slipped into an affair. Kelvin would lie to Mimi about business trips or late meetings, when in reality, he was spending time with Elizabeth. A moment alone with her, Kelvin felt a rush of excitement he hadn't felt in years. Elizabeth seemed sweeter and more adventurous than the quiet, familiar presence of his wife. She made him feel young and admired, feeding his ego. And she began to offer him something he desperately craved: the promise of a son. Elizabeth playfully teased that she came from a family of many boys, saying, "If you were with me, I will give you a handsome son. You will see." Whether by coincidence or cunning, she touched the very core of Kelvin's dissatisfaction. without him even telling her. Kelvin was mesmerized. The idea of finally having a son, an heir to carry his name, sparked in him an obsession. In many Nigerian families, having a male child is considered very important, and Kelvin was no exception. He convinced himself that fate had brought Elizabeth to him. Here was a woman who was not only showering him with affection and excitement, but also hinting she could give him the boy he always wanted. Blinded by this fantasy, he justified his action by focusing on what he felt Mimi lacked, rather than remembering her loyalty and the love their daughters, Syrian and Praise, brought into his life. With Elizabeth in his life, Kelvin's behavior at home went from bad to worse. Often, he wouldn't come home at all, claiming he had urgent business trips or meetings out of town. Some weekends, Mimi and the girls wouldn't see him for days. When he was present, he barely spoke to Mimi except to complain. The warmth and laughter that once filled their home had been replaced by cold silence and muffled sobs. Mimi would lie awake at night, silently crying and wondering what she had done wrong to deserve this treatment. She tried to talk to Kelvin, but he always brushed her off. "I'm tired. I don't want to discuss this now." He would snap if she brought up his absence or the strange perfume scent on his clothes. One evening, Kelvin disappeared yet again, not coming home for 3 nights in a row. Mimi reached her breaking point. Heartbroken and lonely, she packed a small bag for herself and the children and went to stay with her older sister across town. She didn't leave a note. She figured Kelvin might not even notice they were gone. But he did notice. When Kelvin returned to an empty house, he was angry at first, angry that Mimi had dared to leave, and perhaps angry at himself for driving her away. After a day, he swallowed his pride and went to find her. He arrived at Mimi's sister's house in Ikeja late in the evening. Mimi was surprised to see him at the door. "Mimi, please, come back home," Kelvin pleaded quietly, as their daughters peered from behind their mother. This was one of the few times Kelvin had ever humbled himself. Mimi looked at Kelvin. His eyes were weary, and for a moment, he saw a glimpse of the man she fell in love with, not the stranger he had become. "Why, Kelvin, why?" she asked in a trembling voice. "Why should I come back when you would just leave me alone again?" Tears rolled down her cheeks. Kelvin hung his head. He couldn't bring himself to confess his affair, but he mumbled, "I promise, I will change. I've been stressed at work. I won't stay away anymore. I'm sorry for hurting you." It wasn't the full truth, but in that moment, Mimi wanted to believe him. She still loved her husband deeply and wanted her family to be whole. After a long pause, she nodded and agreed to return home, on the condition that he would truly try to repair their marriage. For a short while, it seemed like things might improve. Kelvin behaved better for a few weeks after Mimi and the girls moved back home. He came home earlier and even took Mimi and the children out to a park one Saturday, something he hadn't done in a long time. Mimi held on to hope that their lives could return to normal. However, this peace did not last. Kelvin soon slipped back into his old habits. The late nights and secret phone calls resumed. Mimi could tell that his apologies had been mostly empty words. Her heart ached each time he broke his promises, but she endured it, hoping against hope that he would truly change one day. In an attempt to keep Mimi occupied, and perhaps to ease his guilt, Kelvin decided to set up a small business for her. He rented a shop space for Mimi in a market in Ikeja and gave her some money to start a trade in selling fabrics and women's accessories. "It will keep you busy," he said with a forced smile when he told her about the shop. Mimi was grateful for any kindness from Kelvin, but she was no fool. She knew this gesture was partly to distract her from his continued absences. Nonetheless, she poured her energy into the shop, hoping to find some independence and peace of mind through work. Every day, she went to the market and tended to her little store, finding satisfaction in serving customers and earning a small income. Still, she wished deep down that Kelvin would be truly present as a husband and father, rather than just throwing money at her. Everything reached a breaking point when Elizabeth told Kelvin that she was pregnant and that she believed it was a boy. The news hit Kelvin like a bolt of lightning. Elizabeth showed him an ultrasound scan printout. And though Kelvin could barely understand the fuzzy black and white image, she insisted the doctor had predicted a male child. Kelvin's joy and relief were immense. In that moment, his attachment to Elizabeth solidified completely. It was as if all reason flew out of the window. He began to see Mimi and their daughters as burdens holding him back from the perfect life he envisioned. After learning of the pregnancy, Kelvin grew openly cruel toward Mimi. He stopped giving her any money for household expenses, saying, "You have your shop now, don't you? Figure it out yourself." Bills piled up and Mimi had to stretch the mega earnings from her shop to feed herself and the children. When Syrian fell ill and needed medicine, Kelvin coldly told Mimi he had no money to spare, while at the same time, he was funding Elizabeth's prenatal care and sharing gifts on her. Mimi was hot and furious. One night, she confronted Kelvin as he was packing a bag. "Are you even part of this family anymore?" she asked, voice trembling with pain. "Your daughters ask me why their daddy is never home. What do you want me to tell them?" Kelvin didn't meet her eyes. "I never asked you to tell them anything," he muttered. His callous tone was like a stranger's. Mimi pressed on, her heart pounding. "Kelvin, please. What happened to you? We are a family. I may not have given you a son, but Syrian and Praise are your children too. They adore you, and they don't deserve to be treated like this. Neither do I." At that, Kelvin's temper snapped. "A son?" He barked bitterly. "Yes, you didn't give me a son. And you think 2 daughters are enough for me? Do you know how it feels to be mocked by people because I have no male child?" His voice was loud, and in the small living room of the Ikeja home, it rang with years of pent-up frustration. Mimi stood in shock. "Mocked? Who mocks you?" she asked softly. "Who cares if—" "Everyone," Kelvin interrupted. "Friends, colleagues, even my own relatives hint that I need a son to carry my name. You wouldn't understand." Mimi's eyes welled up with tears. "Kelvin," she whispered, "we could try again. It's in God's hands whether we have a boy or girl." She reached out to touch his arm, but he pulled away sharply. "I'm done waiting," Kelvin said coldly. "Elizabeth is pregnant with my son. I'm going to take responsibility for that child." Mimi felt her blood run cold at those words. It was the first time he spoke Elizabeth's name in front of her. She realized then that her worst suspicions were true. Her husband had been unfaithful and now was leaving to be with the other woman. Fresh tears flowed down Mimi's face. Kelvin paused at the door, perhaps expecting Mimi to beg him to stay, but she could only stare in disbelief and pain. With a final look of determination, Kelvin walked out, shutting the door behind him. Mimi sank to the floor in tears, overwhelmed by grief. In her mind, she knew it was terribly unjust to blame her for not having a son. Biologically, it's the father's chromosomes that decide a baby's sex, not the mother's. Yet, Kelvin had cast all that blame on her. That knowledge offered little comfort against the raw pain in her heart. In the weeks that followed, Kelvin did not return. Mimi learned through a mutual acquaintance that Kelvin had quietly married Elizabeth in a small ceremony, likely reasoning that this was the solution to having a son. Sadly, his choice followed a pattern seen in some families. When a wife doesn't bear a male child, some husbands resort to taking another wife in hopes of getting a son. It was done quietly, perhaps because he knew how wrong it was. After all, Kelvin and Mimi were still legally married. This betrayal cut Mimi to the bone. Not only had Kelvin abandoned her and their daughters, but he had also broken their marriage vows by taking another wife. Mimi found herself alone, heartbroken in a way she never imagined possible. There were nights she couldn't sleep at all, and days she had to force herself to eat and go tend her shop, just to keep life going for her children's sake. Yet, through this all, Mimi also felt a strange sense of relief that the painful uncertainty was over. At least now, she knew where Kelvin stood. He was gone, and she had to find a way to survive and take care of her daughters. Gathering her shattered pride and leaning on her faith and support from family, Mimi resolved to not let Kelvin's betrayal destroy her. She had two little girls looking up to her, and she was determined to be strong for them. With tears and prayers, she pushed forward day by day, finding strength she never knew she had. While Kelvin was entangled in his troubled new marriage, Mimi was quietly rebuilding her life. Left on her own in Ikeja with two young daughters, she turned her attention fully to the small shop Kelvin had set up for her. In the beginning, it was just a humble store in the market, selling fabrics and accessories. Mimi poured her heartbreak and energy into that business. She treated her customers with warmth and honesty, quickly building a good reputation in the market. People came back to Madam Mimi's shop because of her gentle smile and fair prices. As the months passed, the shop began to thrive. Mimi applied the business management knowledge she had gained from her degree to manage her inventory and finances smartly. Every profit she earned, she saved and reinvested into the business. Soon, she expanded her stock from just a few items to a wider range of goods that women in the area wanted. Her sales grew month by month. After a year, Mimi was able to open a second shop in another part of Ikeja, hiring a cousin to help her run it. Her success story was one of many in the city. Women were becoming significant players in businesses. Out of every 100 businesses in Nigeria, about 39 are owned by women. And Mimi was proud to count herself among those determined female entrepreneurs. By the second year, she opened yet another outlet. The small shop Kelvin once opened for her had blossomed into a mini enterprise with multiple outlets across the city. Mimi's success was not just in money. She was becoming a confident entrepreneur, known in the market community for her perseverance. She never forgot the pain she had been through, but she refused to let it define her. Instead, she channeled it into growth. Mimi also made sure her daughters, Sarian and Praise, were well taken care of. She paid their school fees on time and taught them by example about strength and kindness. At home, though it was just the three of them now, there was peace. They would do homework together in the evenings, and sometimes Mimi would let the girls help with simple tasks for the business, like counting stock, to teach them responsibility. Occasionally, Mimi had bits of news about Kelvin. Ikeja's social circles were abuzz with gossip that his new marriage was not going well and that his business was floundering. Each time she heard such a rumor, Mimi felt a mix of sadness and vindication. She had loved Kelvin and never wished him harm, but it was hard not to see the irony. The man who once thought she wasn't enough was now struggling, while she, the scorned wife, was flourishing. Mimi simply focused on her business and prayed for strength to continue on. She harbored no desire for revenge. In her heart, she had begun to find a sense of peace and even forgiveness toward Kelvin, though he hadn't asked for it yet. She would remind herself in quiet moments that bitterness would only hold her back. She chose to remain compassionate, if only for the sake of her own soul and her daughter's well-being. Kelvin's new life with Elizabeth turned out to be nothing like the dream he imagined. At first, he was happy living with his pregnant second wife, excited about the baby boy he believed was on the way. But very soon, reality began to bite. Elizabeth's sweetness started fading once she had secured her place in Kelvin's life. She came from a struggling background and had many relatives who looked to her for support. Now that she was married to Kelvin, her family's expectations fell on him as well. Elizabeth's mother and siblings frequently asked for money, school fees for a younger brother, hospital bills for a sick relative, or extra cash for their rent. If Kelvin ever hesitated, Elizabeth would argue, "A good husband would take care of his in-laws. Don't you love me? Don't you want me and our baby to be happy?" Feeling guilty and eager to prove himself, Kelvin gave in to every demand. The financial strain was immense. Kelvin had once been a successful businessman, but now his savings drained quickly. He had to divert money from his business to keep up with Elizabeth's family's needs and the lifestyle she wanted. Elizabeth herself also had expensive tastes that Kelvin hadn't fully seen before. She wanted new clothes, better furniture, and she talked about moving to a more upscale apartment in Ikeja. The woman who once seemed content just to be with him now constantly complained that Kelvin wasn't doing enough. They argued often, the warmth between them evaporating as quickly as it had sparked. "You said you would take care of me," Elizabeth would shout, arms crossed. Kelvin would rub his temples in frustration, realizing that the peace he sought was nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, Kelvin's own business began to crumble. He had been neglecting his work during the months of his affair and second marriage. Key clients noticed his lack of focus and some contracts were cancelled. His employees were confused and morale dropped. Moreover, the continuous withdrawal of funds for personal matters left the business underfunded. Before long, Kelvin was struggling to pay salaries and keep the business running. Creditors started calling, and the once proud man who never imagined financial trouble was now facing debt. It was a swift fall from grace. The same Ikeja community where Kelvin used to talk with confidence now saw a stressed, haggard man running around trying to salvage his company. In his home, life was well. Things were falling apart. Elizabeth gave birth after several months, but to Kelvin's surprise, the baby was a girl, not the boy he had been promised. The shock was evident on his face at the hospital. Elizabeth quickly tried to soothe him, claiming the doctor must have been wrong about the baby's sex. Kelvin tried to hide his disappointment, but inside, he felt a stench. He had betrayed his family and sacrificed so much and still did not get the son he longed for. Despite that, he loved the newborn baby girl as best as he could, naming her Angel. He told himself that perhaps next time they would have a boy, trying to cling to hope. But even this hope was short-lived, because an even more devastating truth was about to come to light. The real devastation came a few months after baby's birth. Kelvin started noticing things that unsettled him. Elizabeth was often secretive with her phone, much like he had been during his affair. She would step outside to take calls, speaking in hushed tones. At first, Kelvin tried to brush off his suspicion. Perhaps it was just his guilty conscience playing tricks. But one afternoon, when Elizabeth was out, a man showed up at the apartment looking for her. The stranger's familiar manner and the way he asked about the baby made Kelvin's stomach turn. The man left quickly when he realized Kelvin was the husband, but it left Kelvin deeply alarmed. Kelvin couldn't ignore the gnawing worry that had taken root. He decided to get answers. Quietly, he took baby Angel for a routine hospital checkup and requested a paternity test. It was a desperate move, one he never imagined he would have to take. When the test results came back, Kelvin's hands shook as he read them. The baby girl he had been cradling and providing for was not his child. The DNA test confirmed that he was not Angel's biological father. Kelvin felt as if the ground had vanished beneath his feet. His vision blurred and he had to sit down. How could it be? Remembered Elizabeth's certainty that the baby was a boy. Perhaps she had known all along the baby wasn't his and lied to keep him around. Anger, betrayal, and grief washed over Kelvin in waves. That evening, he confronted Elizabeth at home. "Why, Elizabeth?" he asked in a broken voice, holding the test report in his hand. "Whose child is Angel?" Elizabeth's face went pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. Finally, with tears in her eyes, she confessed the truth. She had been unfaithful. In fact, she wasn't even sure who the real father was. She had been seeing someone else around the same time her relationship with Kelvin began. She had told Kelvin the baby was his and a boy because she knew doubt was what he wanted to hear, and she feared losing him. Kelvin felt a deep sense of humiliation and pain. He had destroyed his once happy family for a lie. In rage and despair, he shouted, "I gave up everything for you, and now you have given me nothing but heartbreak." Elizabeth cried and tried to apologize, but there was nothing left to salvage. The trust between them was shattered beyond repair. In the end, their marriage collapsed under the weight of deceit and disappointment. They separated, with Elizabeth leaving to seek support elsewhere, taking baby Angel with her. Kelvin let them go. He was too defeated to fight for anything. Within a short span of time, he found himself completely alone, no son, no second wife, and having lost the wife and daughters he had originally vowed to love. He was left with a failing business, debt, and a broken spirit. The man, who once walked arrogantly through Ikeja, now moved like a shadow of himself. He had lost nearly everything. With Elizabeth gone, the reality of his mistakes hit him like a ton of bricks. His pride, his infidelity, his obsession with having a son, everything had led him to ruin. Kelvin sank into remorse and regret, realizing that in chasing an illusion, he had thrown away the true treasures of his life, Mimi's steadfast love and the joy of his daughters, Syrian and Praise. He was ashamed and didn't know if he could ever make things right. But one thing became clear to him in his solitude: he needed to seek forgiveness from the woman he had so deeply wronged. Summoning every ounce of courage, Kelvin decided to approach Mimi to ask for forgiveness. It was one of the hardest things he had ever done in his life. One rainy afternoon, he made his way to one of Mimi's shops, a leather store she had recently opened near a busy Ikeja street. Drenched from the rain and nervous, Kelvin stepped inside, causing the little bell above the window to jingle. Mimi looked up from the counter and froze in surprise. There stood Kelvin. He looked thin than she remembered, with tired eyes and clothes that hung a bit loosely on his once confident frame. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. A shop assistant glanced between them and quietly stepped into the back to give them privacy. Mimi's heart fluttered with a mix of emotions, anger, pity, and an old love that still lived somewhere deep down. Kelvin walked slowly toward her. Then suddenly he went down on his knees, right there on the shop floor. "Mimi," he began, voice cracking, "I have no right to ask anything of you. I am sorry." Tears welled up in his eyes. Mimi was startled. In all their years, she had rarely seen Kelvin cry. She felt her own eyes tear up, but she remained silent, letting him speak. "I treated you so badly," Kelvin continued. "I was proud and foolish. I hurt you and our girls more than anyone deserves. I was wrong about everything." He wiped a raindrop, or perhaps a tear, from his face and took a shaky breath. "Elizabeth, he faltered, not sure how Mimi knew. "She betrayed me, and I lost everything. I don't expect you to feel sorry for me. I brought this on myself. But Mimi, please, I beg you to find it in your heart to forgive me. Not for my sake, but for Syrian and Praise. I've been a terrible father, and they don't deserve that. I want to be part of their lives again, if you will allow it. Even if you cannot take me back. Please, Let me at least be their father again. Mimi listened, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. She saw true remorse in Kelvin's eyes. This was not the confident, dismissive man who had once brushed off her pleas. This was a broken man seeking redemption. She thought of all the nights she cried, all the pain he caused. Part of her wanted to scream at him for what he did, but another part of her, the part that had found peace and strength, felt compassion. Finally she spoke, her voice soft but steady. Kelvin, she said, I needed to hear this. You broke my heart and our family. Do you even know what it was like for me and the girls after you left? Kelvin bowed his head and lowered it. I can't imagine it, he whispered, and I'm so sorry. Mimi closed her eyes briefly, then continued. I won't lie, it was very hard, but God has been good to us. We survived. We are doing well now. She gestured gently around her shop. I didn't wither away because you left. I found my strength. Kelvin nodded, wiping his face. I see that, he said hoarsely, and I'm happy for you and ashamed of myself. There was a silence, filled only by the patter of rain outside. Then Mimi took a deep breath. I forgive you, Kelvin, she said quietly. For Kelvin, those words were more precious than gold. He felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Thank you, he breathed. He slowly got up from his knees, still unsure of where to go from here. He knew forgiveness didn't mean everything would return to how it was. His voice trembling, he added, I know I don't deserve it or anything from you. I have nothing now, Mimi. The business, my money, it's all gone. He swallowed hard, then glanced around the shop, the very first shop he had opened for her. It had grown into something much larger now. The shop, I put it in your name, he continued nervously. It belongs to you, but do you think, he hesitated, ashamed to even form the request. Do you think I could possibly use it to start over, even as a means to work and earn? I don't want to be a burden. I just want a chance to rebuild my life, no matter how small. Mimi looked at Kelvin quietly for a long time after his halting request. Here was the same man who once abandoned her, now humbled and asking for help. She had every reason to turn him away empty-handed. But Mimi's heart had grown wise and compassionate through her trials. She thought of Syrian and praise. Despite everything, they loved their father in their innocent way and would benefit from seeing him back on his feet. Taking a slow breath, Mimi gave her answer. Kelvin, I meant it when I said I forgive you, she said gently. But forgiveness doesn't mean things can go back to the way they were. I cannot be your wife again. Kelvin nodded, anguish in his eyes, but understanding in his heart. He had expected as much. However, Mimi continued, I won't kick a man who is already down. You did put this shop in my name long ago. You wanted it back and you shall have a chance, but not exactly in the way you think. Kelvin looked up in confusion. Mimi managed a small smile. I will not hand you money or just give the shop to you outright. What I would do is offer you a job. I have expanded this business into several shops. I will let you manage one of the smaller branches as a start. Kelvin's eyes widened in surprise. He hadn't expected kindness beyond forgiveness. You would trust me with that? He stammered. Mimi nodded. You have experience in business, and I need someone I can trust to manage operations at that branch. It will be under my company, and you will earn a salary from it. Think of it as a second chance to do something good with honesty and hard work. Kelvin was overwhelmed and momentarily speechless. He had come seeking forgiveness and perhaps the return of a single shop. Instead, Mimi was offering him a way to regain his dignity. And she was doing it without reuniting with him as a husband, which made it clear her motive was genuine compassion, not personal affection. Kelvin lowered his head again, fresh tears falling. Thank you, Mimi. I don't know how to repay you for this mercy. Mimi shook her head. This isn't about repayment, she said softly. Just do your best. Prove that you can be better for yourself and for the girls. She also gently reminded him, our daughters need to see their father as a responsible man. Don't let them down again. Calvin placed a hand on his chest and promised, I won't. I'll work hard and never betray your trust again. In his heart, he knew this was likely the most generosity he would ever receive from her, and he vowed not to squander it. And so, with that agreement, Calvin was given a fresh start. It was not as the head of the household he once was, but as a manager of a small branch of Mimi's now flourishing business. It was a humble position, but an honest one. For the first time in a long while, Calvin felt hope. He understood that this opportunity was a gift born from Mimi's grace and the love for their children, not a rekindling of their past romance. It was truly a chance, a second chance at life, one he knew he had to earn every day moving forward. Months later, the change in Calvin was evident to anyone who knew him. Each morning, he opened the shop he managed, a modest branch of Mimi's enterprise, and greeted customers with a humility that was new to his character. He kept ledgers diligently, treating the staff with respect, and worked long hours to prove himself. He no longer boasted or looked down on others. Instead, he listened and learned. In the evenings, when he wasn't too tired, Calvin would spend time with Sarah and praise. Little by little, he was rebuilding his relationship with his daughters. At first, they were shy and unsure around him, remembering how he used to be absent and stern. But as he consistently showed up, helping with homework, taking them for weekend strolls in Ikeja's parks, or simply listening to their stories, the girls began to smile and laugh with their father again. Mimi observed this development from a polite distance. She and Calvin remained friendly, but kept clear boundaries. She was cordial in their interactions about the children or business matters, but their personal lives stayed separate. Mimi had healed enough to move on, and while she bore no ill will, she was content without him as a husband. Seeing Calvin set up their daughters was enough to satisfy her that she had made the right decision in helping him. It reinforced what she had told him, that true love and family are measured in respect, loyalty and kindness, not in having a son or accumulating wealth. Calvin often reflected on the past as he stood behind the counter of the shop. There were moments when regret stabbed at him, remembering Mimi's tears or the birthdays of his daughters he missed. But now, he channeled those feelings into determination to be better. He finally understood the folly of his pride. He realized that the grass he thought was greener on the other side was an illusion. Everything he truly needed was already with the wife and daughters he had once taken for granted. It was a harsh lesson, but one that saved him from a worse fate. In quiet moments, Calvin would whisper a prayer of thanks for the second chance he had been given, a chance to rebuild not just his livelihood, but his character. He knew not every woman would have done what Mimi did for him. Her act of grace in forgiving him and helping him find his footing again taught him the real meaning of love. It wasn't romantic love. He had lost that from her, but it was a compassionate, selfless kind of love for others. He learned that being truly rich and had little to do with money or having rather, it was about being rich in integrity, in family, and in gratitude for the people who stand by you. Calvin had lost Mimi as a wife forever, but he gained wisdom and a renewed bond with his children. As he watched Sarah and Praise play outside the shop one sunny afternoon, their laughter echoing like music, Calvin managed a genuine smile. He understood now that these everyday moments of faithfulness and family were worth more than all the pride and fleeting desires he once chased. It was a lesson learned the hard way, but one that will stay with him for the rest of his life. The story teaches that pride, infidelity, and greed can destroy even the strongest foundations, but humility and forgiveness can open the door to healing. Calvin lost his home, his dignity, and nearly his children because he chased illusions and despised the blessings he already had. Mimi's strength and grace show that true power lies in perseverance, integrity, and compassion, not in revenge or bitterness. In the end, forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation, but it can give both the wronged and the offender a chance to move forward with peace and growth. Thank you so much for watching this amazing story about Kelvin and Mimi on African Stories by V. If you liked it and felt inspired with your journey, please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing with your friends, and leaving a comment below. To see more interesting stories and learn about different cultures, subscribe to African Stories by V, and do not forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more stories to you. Until we meet again, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep smiling.